What's up? So I just wrapped up my workshop and it was beautiful. I mean, it was really great. I've had a lot of wonderful things happening in my life over the past few months, but we'll talk about those later. But still, even though those wonderful things were happening, some of my best memories are from workshop over the past few months. We had a nice long time to relax into everything, and there was some very serious transformations to people's practices, which is, of course, my main goal in that context. But why am I here? I'm here because workshop always seems like a good opportunity for me to catch up with the YouTube audience as well. I take what people are going through in workshop as sort of a little cross-section of what probably a lot of artists are going through. And I was very interested to see that the most urgent thing that came up in this workshop was the spiritual aspect of art, which for this audience is certainly not all that surprising, but it was definitely a pleasure to get in deep on that stuff with people. So by the spiritual side of art, I mean the part of art that transforms you and that also transcends you. And well, in the current art climate, the lack of guidance around those things or touchstones as to how that process is going to go. And in particular, in this workshop, people really latched on to some way out there points on the spiritual side of things. Specifically, people really connected with no free will and no self. I would say somewhere maybe halfway through the workshop, maybe around week 5 or something like that, the office hours in particular for the workshop, basically all anybody wanted to talk about was questions of free will, self, religion, myths, restructuring yourself, dealing with your internality. Those really became the foregrounded qualities of our discussions. So I thought this would be a great chance to sort of share that with the broader audience as well, which for me, I see as basically restating the ground floor of this channel. And this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Everything that I'm about to say here, I am on the record about throughout the channel, but especially in the very early videos. If you go back to the first 40 or so videos on this channel, they are a series of drawing meditations where I try to guide people through a series of exercises that will hopefully produce insights into some of the biggest changes that the art practice can bring in terms of perception and how you relate to yourself. So given that I am on the record with these things, I'm not going to be bashful about sort of just stating these things outright. So at the ground floor, I have basically 3, let's say, extreme axioms that influence everything that I do. They are that there's no free will, there's no self, there's nothing. I want to make clear that these are very extreme in the current era, in our current culture. But I want to make clear that these are not actually extreme or unusual. These are some of the oldest ideas. I'm not saying everybody sort of connects with them, but these things have been discussed since the beginning of philosophy, human history maybe. I mean, certainly in Buddhism, the idea that there's no free will, no self, there's nothing, those are ground floor tenets of Buddhism, which is one of the oldest and most well-ascribed religions in the world. And I'm not a Buddhist myself, but I play one on TV. So these are not actually new ideas. They're not actually scandalous ideas. It's just that in our current culture, and certainly in the United States, they chafe against the cultural paradigm. Now, before I talk about these more, I want to give a little disclaimer, which is that I'm not trying to convince you of anything here. I believe these things and they have a great impact in my life, but I don't need you to believe it. By the nature of this kind of discussion, it is going to sound like I'm trying to convince you. That's sort of unavoidable here, I think, when you're sort of trying to explain ground floor philosophy that you know other people don't agree with. It's going to sound persuasive just by the nature of language. But yeah, to just disclaimer up front, I don't need you to agree with me, and I don't need you to believe this. I want you to live your life however you want to live your life. So given that, why the hell am I bringing this up? Because I think it's important. That should be obvious, but I think it's important to art specifically. I am an art communicator, right? I spend a lot of time talking about art, and I spend a lot of time helping students with the art practice. I am the kind of artist and teacher who believes that art has to do with everything in your life. Given that, it would be difficult for people to understand where I'm coming from if they don't know sort of my ground floor beliefs, like I said, my axioms, right? Because they do influence everything. How I frame art, how I see problems that emerge with art, how I will guide people to improve their practices and their work. It influences all of that. And as many of you have been around for a while here, I do have some pretty counterintuitive views on art and how we improve at it. And yeah, I just think that that stuff won't really make sense unless you understand where I'm coming from. So let me once again restate where I'm coming from. Before I do, let me think. Do I have any other disclaimers? Yes. Yes, I do. Let me cut off one major thing right at the pass. This viewpoint is not nihilistic. This is not nihilism. I know how these statements sound. No free will, no self, there's nothing. Please do not let yourself believe that I am leaning anyone towards anything like negativity. No. I believe that these all lead to joyful conclusions. And I have experienced all of these things in my life as producing nothing but, ironically, a greater sense of freedom and joy in my life and in my art practice. And I think that that's the same thing that's available for you or for anybody else, especially in a discussion of free will. If you think that accepting that there's no free will means that you're going to lay in bed and stare at the ceiling every day, I don't know any other way to put this, but just that that's baby thinking. That is the thinking of somebody who has not thought about free will for more than a week. That is not at all what's going to happen. I think that you will find that these things actually encourage you to do more in the world, to connect with the world more, to connect with your practice more, to connect with your fellow artists more. I do think this all leads to joy, and I will try to explain how that is. I don't know how much of that I can do in just one video. There's a lot of discussion here. But yeah, please, we're not talking about anything miserable or small or nihilistic here. No self, no free will, there's nothing. These things open incredible parts of life. That's what I truly believe. Now, I had thought before I sat down to record this, what would be a good way to sequence this discussion? Like when I first thought about sitting down and talking about this, I wondered, is there a way to go neatly and logically from no free will to no self to there's nothing? And I concluded that there isn't, or at least it would be very artificial. The thing about these insights is that they imply each other. They are actually intertwined from the beginning. And I think that you will sort of see how they imply each other quite logically if you connect with one or the other. So I think for this discussion, I am going to lens it mostly through free will, just because that seems to beg the most questions about art, and that seemed to be amongst the thing that people in my workshop connected with the most. They were very interested in the notion of non-self as well, but I think free will was dominant. Now that I think about it, they didn't really connect that much with there's nothing. They were pretty far out, but maybe that one still has some meat on its bones. So it's all tied up with each other. But I think we're going to lens mostly through free will. But to be very, very clear, they're all the same thing. It's all intertwined. It's all connected. So, what to say about art without free will? First off, I want to say this is not conceptual, not for me, right? Maybe for you, this is conceptual, a sort of strange philosophical hypothetical, is it possible that somebody could feel this way or something like that? And I think that makes sense, but I need you to understand that for me personally, I do not experience my artistic practice or other parts of my life through a lens of free will. It's not just that I don't believe. It's not just that I don't believe in free will. It's like it's clear to me moment to moment that it is not there. So this is a very nuanced, very difficult discussion to have, but I want to say that at least from the other side, it ain't here, right? And here I am. I'm a functioning person in the world. I make YouTube videos. I help people. I'm very happy. Like it's not a concept for me. It is a lived reality. Now, that may produce some weird images and things like that, myths, as I like to call them, about what my life might be like or something like that. And I promise you, nothing super unusual is happening over here. A few unusual things, maybe one or two of them is super unusual, but on balance, nothing super unusual is going on here. But to get a little bit more precise, I find that it is difficult to have this conversation because I think most debates about free will, and I haven't had many debates about it, but you can find plenty of debates about free will if you go looking for them, they seem to become debates about definitions of free will. They rarely seem to be debates about free will itself. So I think that the main conflict that arises is that people can't agree on where free will sort of sits in the chain of causality. So I look at my life and the art practice from a pretty broad, pulled back view. From where I'm sitting, your art practice, I'm going to keep saying your art practice. Know that I'm subbing in your whole life, my whole life. I think it applies to everything. I don't think there's any barriers around art, right? Your art practice is conditioned by absolutely everything around it. Right? Your art practice is conditioned by where you grew up, what your childhood was like, what you ate for breakfast, the last argument that you had with your spouse, how much energy you have that day, how good was your sleep, what is your artistic training, what artistic ideas have you been exposed to, what were your favorite childhood media, what kind of habits have you developed around sitting down to do art? What is your personality like? Are you someone who can bear a lot of boredom? Are you someone who can barely bear boredom at all? Those are just some off the cuff, off the top of my head examples, right? But the true space of conditioning factors, I would say, is uncountable, is maybe not infinite, but for all intents and purposes, infinite. It is a tremendous amount of things that are influencing you moment to moment. From where I'm sitting, the sum of these conditioning factors gives a perfect accounting for the next line that you're going to draw in your drawing. And for me, that's enough. That's the end of the story. I don't need to shoehorn free will into there at any point. Now, someone who believes in free will or wants to believe that there is some self that is involved in this process, somewhere in there, maybe right before the pencil touches the surface of the paper, they want to insert a sort of magical, glowing blue self who is the final arbiter, the final gate, that even though there is the tremendous influence of all of these other factors, right? Right before the pencil touches the paper, this extremely potent and highly culpable self says either yes or no or decides what's finally going to go down on the paper. You can hear my bias in just the way that I'm phrasing it, right? As someone who doesn't believe in free will, I really struggle to actually steelman the case here. I don't know what it would mean to be totally in control of this vast experience that has conscious elements, unconscious elements, is predicting the future, is imagining the past, is experiencing things in the present, is a sort of node in the middle of an infinite web with not just other nodes, but other little spiders like you sort of nudging the web and touching things. It doesn't make sense to me. I struggle with this, right? If you think that I'm crazy for sitting on the internet and saying that I don't believe in free will, right back at you, you psycho. I mean, from the other side of the no free will mirror, I am as confused by you as you are confused by me, right? And that puts us in a very interesting position. I think it's especially interesting because I think that we would probably all agree on those constructing points that I mentioned, right? So this is going back to the point that I said before, that debates about free will tend to be debates about definitions of free will. I'm going to assume you believe there's free will there and that it's involved not just in art, but in your whole life, right? You would probably agree that you did not choose what you were exposed to in the womb, that you did not choose who your parents were, that you did not choose what that teacher said to you in 3rd grade, that you did not choose who your art rival was going to be, that you did not choose that traumatic event that happened to you when you were 19, that you are not going to choose the next surprise that comes in your life, that you're not going to choose the chronic illness that you might develop. You probably agree with me on all of those things, that these vastly influential things in your life are not up to you. And you would probably agree that they influence you, right? Certainly if you've had to do any work with like working through trauma or mental illness or anything like that, then you have had a head-on collision with the fact that the things that happen to you in life leave real, powerful, energetic marks on your psyche and how you're going to go through your life day to day. You might be dealing with anxiety, with depression, guilt about the past, shame about the present, and worry about the future. You probably agree with me that these things do have big influence. You've maybe had experiences where they actually, keep you in bed for protracted periods of time, or keep you from doing the things that you know you want to do for very long periods of time. And yet for some reason, even though we agree on all of those things, on the power of the conditioning factors, on how we are so highly influenced and porous and permeable to the great cosmos, somewhere right at the end, we need to have this little nettling seed that is culpable, right? Morally culpable. Now, I said morally culpable there, so let me return back to disclaimer land, right? One of the first things that comes up when people debate free will is that they go completely off topic and they start talking about how can we have a justice system and sue people if people aren't morally responsible for their actions. And all I have to say to you is that it is not my responsibility to explain how a justice system is supposed to work without free will to you. That's not what we are talking about here. Let some lawyer who doesn't believe in free will, using their expertise, explain to you how you might still have a justice system without notions of revenge and retribution. I think that to think that it would be impossible is simply a failure of imagination. Along similar lines, I'm under no responsibility in this discussion to square this notion with the doctrines of your religion. Sorry, that's not what we're talking about here. If we're talking about anything, we're talking about how it applies to art. And questions of moral culpability in art are much lighter than they are in the courtroom. And I think that we should feel free to examine and explore within that realm. So what does it mean for art if we were to accept the notion, we're playing with a hypothetical here, right? Again, I want you to live your life the way that you want to live and believe the things that you want to believe. But what would it mean if we were making art from a place of no free will? What would that mean? Well, I think that it's very freeing, actually. I think that it makes it easier to manage the practice and to, look, I'm going to be straight up with you. I think it makes it more joyful. I think that it makes things better. I mean, look, statistically speaking, it's highly unlikely that you are experiencing your art practice with uninterrupted white-hot joy right now, just statistically speaking. And you are ostensibly experiencing the suffering, frustration, and confusion of the art practice, even though you have complete free will, right? So free will on its own is not really helping you out much in art. Let me present to you an alternative, a delicious alternative of what things might be like without free will. When you accept that you are not in free control of this situation, that you are not a transparent and gelatinous purple haze haunting your body that can somehow pull itself up by its own bootstraps and have perfect influence on all of these things that weirdly are much more material than it, you take the conditioning factors much more seriously, right? I think that it's easy to dismiss the conditioning factors when you have this myth operating in your head that yes, they have some influence, but really what I should be is I should be a soul who is Jocko Willink. I should be a soul who is David Goggins, right? I should be this other core personality, right? And I have a myth for what that core personality looks, sounds like, feels like, and how it deals with things. It is this very gritty, very disciplined, very stoic, very unaffected gelatinous purple haze that haunts the body. Again, when I say it so explicitly, you probably think that that sounds ridiculous, but what are your intuitions? It's one thing to not agree with the words, but are you living like that? I think a lot of people may be living like that in a very unscrutinized way. If you remove that myth, or if you soften it a bit, if you get a little space around it, I think that it inclines you to take the conditioning factors much more seriously. You see, okay, if I'm not joyful in the art practice, it's for a reason. And that reason is not my inherently broken soul, right? It is not sort of the original sin of my birth that is making me a bad person and a bad artist with a bad personality who's never going to get better and deserves all of this suffering. All of those things are built in to this notion that you have free will, which of course free will requires a self, right? If there's no free will, then what does it really mean to be a self, an agent, right? A sense of robust agency is built into our common sense notion of selfhood. Okay. They're all tied up with each other. Back to the conditioning factors. You take them more seriously when you see that you don't have free will. So instead of beating up on yourself, you say, I am not joyful in the practice because I have not placed the conditions for joy to emerge, and I have not nurtured the habits to have joy emerge. And then you can ask yourself, well, what are those conditions? How do I place them? How do I nurture them, right? How do I build better habits? How do I maintain better mindfulness of my internality so that I know this is a good thing emerging, this is a bad thing emerging, and then when a good thing emerges, how do I nurture it, right? Instead of, tell me, as an artist, have you ever felt very happy with your art and your practice or yourself, and then suddenly, surprisingly, very quickly, you find that your creative faculties are now being put to the ends of discovering why you shouldn't be happy with yourself or your work or your practice? Just let me know. Just let me know if you've ever done that to yourself. That is a negative habit, an unwholesome habit. There are more wholesome habits available, right? You can accept that you are happy, peaceful, joyful in the practice, that you like your work. And then instead of wondering what's wrong with that, or if you deserve that, again, because you have this dirty soul that hasn't deserved it, hasn't earned it yet, you can just say, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Soak it up, drink deeply of that glowing golden ambrosia. This is a very wholesome conditioning factor for the practice. This, like anything else in the practice, you get better at the more that you rehearse it, the more that you practice it. So, if you accept that the practice is going to be nothing but the sum of parts like this, you're going to take this much more seriously, I think. I certainly did, right? Once I came to realize this, I took deathly serious that when negative, self-destructive, self-sabotaging thoughts emerge, they're just thoughts. They're not me, right? There's no free will, there's no self, there's nothing. They're not me, so I can just handle them and grapple with them the same way that I would handle and grapple with the words of someone else, of my mom, of my dad, of my friends, of my rivals, of my enemies, and my detractors. So I just handle those words that are emerging, those thoughts that are emerging in the same way. I see they're unwholesome, they are habituating unhelpful and unwholesome habits. I have to push back, and I will replace them with wholesome habits. I can tell you from personal experience, replacing them, nurturing with radical self-compassion and patience for oneself and love for oneself, nurturing more positive thought patterns, body patterns, emotion patterns. There's a whole realm of things that you can sort of nurture carefully. But just staying on the thought patterns, putting effort into actually sort of swapping the negative thoughts out for positive ones, sort of like Indiana Jones putting the bag onto the Stelia at the beginning of the movie, it makes a difference. I can tell you from personal experience, it really makes a difference. Progress is possible. Progress is possible. You're not stuck the way that you are. There is no robust self, so you are always open to radical and absolute transformation. You can absolutely change the nature of your internality, and for the better. You can. Oh, but Stephen, if there's no free will, who's choosing to change it? Your whole karma, the entire flow of your life and your suffering and the good things is conditioning the desire in this personality at this time to change. Right? It's that desire to change, that desire to make your life better is not free from nowhere. You know, if you don't care, freely choose to care about it right now. You can't. If my words are resonating with you at all, it's because of past experience and a future unknown to you. But this is vital in the art practice. This is possible, and I think it's vital. And personally, I think it's urgent. I think it is urgent right now. I think that we are entering a new era in art where people need to take these things more seriously. A lot of the old incentive structures are crumbling, are changing. The cultural buckets that were sort of collecting the people in the world who desired to draw and paint and to make art, those buckets are coming apart, and they need to be replaced with new ones. We need new cultural systems for holding people's creativity, which is very, very important because creativity is existential for a lot of people. You know, they'll go crazy if they don't have some supportive cultural milieu to put their creative energy towards. So I think it is urgent that we improve at these things and that we make art feel better in general. People are so miserable making art. I thought you loved art. Don't you love art? Isn't this the thing that you know you wish you were doing more than anything else? People are so miserable. They're coming apart at the seams. They're so sad. You know, I see it in students all the time. They're so distraught over this structureless, happy thing that they would probably say is one of the things that is most important to them in their entire lives. And they're so distraught by it. It hurts them. It hurts them. Why? Why? There's no free will, there's no self, there's nothing. Because there's nothing, art is within the realm of experience, art has no structure. There's nothing about it that says you have to be miserable while you do it. And I don't mean at the end of the road, while you're learning. Day one, from day one to mastery, you never need to be upset while making art. It's your own little realm. It's your own little world. You know, you're not flying a commercial airliner. There's very few rails on art. It is a dimension where you rule. You are God there. And any misery that you find there, you put it there. I hate to say it. I really hate to say it. It's uncomfortable to say because I know people are going through unbelievably extreme pain in art, and they are often connecting that with, as I've said, trauma, family relationships. It's very serious stuff is getting tied up there in art as part of almost everybody's journey, but it's like, but you're the one tying it up. I hate to tell you, I know that that's gonna piss a lot of people off, and I'm not dismissing it, right? I hope you understand that I'm not dismissing it. When I teach, I get in the shit with people about this stuff. I don't dismiss it. In fact, I take it more seriously than usually anybody else has ever taken it from them, right? So I am not dismissing it, but I have to tell you the truth. You're putting it there. It doesn't have to be part of the art. It doesn't have to be part of the art. Now, I think what's happening unconsciously in there when people do that, even if they don't understand this, I think what's happening is that their unconscious, their deep vastness that is under the conscious experience has actually introduced the trauma and the pain into art, seeking help, hoping that art will help heal it, right? Now, again, if you are someone who finds your autobiographical pains to be sort of nothing but intrusive in the art practice, I understand how galling that can sound or how annoying that may sound, but I really think that. I think that deep down, it's getting in, because it doesn't need to be in there, right? It's getting in there, it's staying there. Your interest keeps reinserting it into art because the unconscious wants art to heal it, to help heal it. And I'm here to tell you that it can. It really can. Art can do incredible things, things you wouldn't believe. Art is so much vaster than most people imagine. So I think that there's a reason that it shows up and that pain propagates. And art can heal it. But in order to allow that process to flow, you've got to get out of your own way. You've got to get out of your own way. And what better way to get out of your own way than to realize you were never there? And that is what is happening when we peer through the illusion of free will, right? It's not that we destroy free will. Now, like I said, it's still up for debate, right? If there is no free will, and you were to realize that, it's not that you would have destroyed free will, it's that you just realized it was never there. And even though it was never there, you still fought and cried and desired and loved and hated, and you still had greed and avarice, and you still had compassion and love. You're gonna get everything you want, even if there's no free will, right? The system rolls on the way it rolls on, right? By reacting to the conditioning factors, reacting through the lens of this human body, this view of the cosmos, this particular personality, or what feels like a personality. You're gonna get everything that you want. You still get to keep everything that you want. Even if you see that there's no free will, you still get to feel like you're making free choices. The only difference is that deep down, when scrutinized, you will see, as I said, that it's just a feeling. It's just another feeling that emerges. And we have a lot of feelings that are highly influential on us. It is one amongst many. That may sound like it won't have that big of an effect, but it will. It de-weights particular kinds of suffering in a very, very significant way. Like I said, removing, not just conceptually, but in your guts, in your heart, the notion that you are some inherently flawed, bad self, bad soul, is a huge freedom for the people who need that, for the people who come to realize that. And with that weight off, you get to still roll on. You get to still roll on. You know, don't create false myths and images about what someone who has moved past these things would act like, right? Like, oh, well, they would never react to anything. They would never get angry. They would never defend themselves. Foolishness. No, baby thinking. That's not it. We need a more mature viewpoint on what this kind of thing means, right? There is still every reason to defend yourself. There's still every reason to impinge yourself upon others on the level of the relative world that we need to, right? I don't believe in free will. If I ever wound up in court, I would never stand up to defend myself in court saying that, well, I disagree with the entire axiomatic notion of this courtroom because I don't believe in free will, and so I'm not responsible for my actions. That would indeed be crazy. From a more mature viewpoint, it's clear that that would just be utterly inappropriate. I would defend myself on the relativistic level of that context and not cynically. I get it. I totally get it, right? Whatever I'm on trial for, I am the nexus in this web, the node in this web that did that, right? For some reason, these bodily proclivities, these mental temperaments, right? This personality, this bit of ignorance, this bit of heedlessness resulted in this action, and there's consequences, right? That's the way everything is. That's the way the whole world operates. It's not just people who have free will. It's like if a dog bites a child, there's consequences, right? If a bear attacks somebody, if a car or a motorcycle is not operating correctly, there's consequences in the world, right? So I just said that I had no responsibility to justify how anything like a justice system would work without free will. And I don't, and I shouldn't have gone there, but you know, it's hard to avoid these questions sometimes. So maybe that's a sign that I have made my main point here. Let me think. Okay, if there's anything that I need to shore up, I need to return to that point about nihilism. I need to make clear that this is not a nihilistic viewpoint. And again, all I can really do is speak from my personal experience, right? I need you to know that joy is on the other side of these insights. So I'm here to tell you that I am very joyful and I experience great joy in the art practice. Being that I don't feel that I do it freely, I have to ask myself, and you would have to ask yourself as well, if we're not doing it, who's doing it? What is happening when we make art? Well, if you don't have robust agency over it, if there's no you, if there's no self, who's doing the art? Everything. Everything. At least that's how I feel. You don't need to feel that way. Art is very open to whatever you want to put there. But to speak for me personally, it's clear when I sit down to draw that it is everything drawing. It is this body, this mind, this consciousness, this personality, this autobiography, these hopes for the future. And beyond that, it is this great sky, this green grass. It is this human biology. It is this human physiology. It is the entire shape of the sensorium as crafted across all of these many millennia of evolution. It is the wind in the trees. It is the nature of history. It is things as light as ideas and as heavy as mountains. It is the great cosmos itself drawing scampering little goblins in my sketchbook. To not just hold this conceptually, right? To hold it conceptually would be to lose it in saccharine hippie banalities that we have all gotten very bored of. But to feel it for real, to experience it, right? Changes everything. Changes everything. Now, you can experience it very often, but even just one experience, I really believe that, on the level of grandeur that I'm talking about, even one head-on experience, a memorable one that stays with you, is kind of enough. You'll never forget it. You'll never forget it. And once you've experienced it, you won't be able to trick yourself in the same way about what's going on here ever again. And the intensity of that experience really does de-weight a lot of the bad incentives that we have around art these days. Things like social media numbers, what mommy and daddy think, is your drawing better than the last drawing your rival posted? It just, all this stuff becomes deeply, 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 embarrassingly unimportant. When you realize that, perhaps unbeknownst to you for some time, you had a much greater responsibility with your art. It was lurking underneath the whole time. Every little sketch, every little line, every fleck of graphite, every face, every bit of anatomy, everything. It was the whole cosmos drawing. It was all one drawing. That's quite a responsibility. I think that people can resist this sometimes because it seems scary how big the responsibility is, but it is a joyful responsibility. I promise you that with the right viewpoint on these things, it will only give you energy. It will only excite you. And when the little weeds of disappointment and upset sprout in the artistic garden, as they always will, they always return, it will be much easier to pluck them. You'll just be able to smile at them and say, the weeds are just another part of the garden. We weed them for the sake of the flowers. For a lot of people, the flowers are not in bloom, not in bloom. It's a little confusing. But once you have things well in hand, the garden is going well, the flowers are blooming, and the weeds are getting plucked, you'll have everything wholesome, everything righted, much less inclined to obsess about the weeds, to just enjoy yourself. Enjoy, 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 enjoy. When you enjoy, the cosmos enjoys. We need not add more suffering to this picture. We can make it beautiful. The beatific vision is beautifying vision. The vision of the artist that sees things and, to some extent, decides to see them as beautiful and honor them as such by making art. If any of this just seems far too confusing, just draw. Just draw. These are all words, concepts. Concepts are never the truth. They can never indicate the truth. It is to be experienced. And fortunately, I think as artists, for questions like this, we have the absolute best guide, art. We need not understand the concepts. We need not obsess about these things. We need not get too caught up in philosophizing. If we open our hearts, the art will answer everything for us. The art is a magical substrate. I truly believe that. That will give us anything that we ask for. We just need to make sure that we ask for something big enough. So please, as you go on with your art, don't make yourself small. And don't let others make you small. Get free will and self out of the way so that it can be replaced by everything. Happy drawing.